Welcome. I'm Chase Carrington, and welcome to the Chase the Sun hands-on Bible study. Now, I've done this once before, and I'm doing it again. So the idea is I'm just going to record me studying a passage of the Bible I would study anyway. So hopefully you can kind of see my process, and hopefully we'll both learn something from this verse through this study. Now, actually, I have a couple verses here today. I'm preparing for my John Young Adult Bible study, and I have a couple of things. We're doing John 3:22 all the way down to 36. We're going to do this entire section. We're going to go through it. We may not have time to do it all. I'm going to try to take a look at least at most of these verses. I think we'll start by reading through the entire passage. Now let's see, let's make this larger. Just for now. Oops, that's the wrong thing. I think there's some way there we go. I don't know why, but my Logos app is incredibly laggy right now, so that's not really the stream. I can't really explain it. I'll have to troubleshoot it or something. So please excuse if you see this jerky. Wow, it's actually pretty smooth now. We'll start by reading the passage, but before we get into it, I'm just going to share the stream we've got going. Overall, I found this passage pretty interesting. Now, something kind of interesting about my Bible study is we've talked about John the Baptist a lot, especially our first few meetings. We talked about John the Baptist a ton, and his relationship with Christ and his involvement in his coming. So it's kind of, I came into this thinking it's kind of more the same. But I think there's a lot here we can still learn about John the Baptist, his view of Christ, and also Christ's view of him. And of course, we'll learn about Christ's deity and his position through this, how he is exalted by John the Baptist. And I think it's going to be a really interesting study. Hold up. There we go. YouTube application's never there when I want it. Hold up, let me close that. Sorry guys, hang on for a second. And when watching the recording, you might want to stay tuned. So honestly, I was a little behind today. I wanted to do this a little earlier, but just things got in the way, as things tend to. There we go, going live. I'm almost there, guys. Give me a little bit of patience. There we go. Share now. Well, let's get into this. I have Bibles and books piled on my desk. And I, of course, have many Logos windows open. So I am ready. Let's get started. Let's start, of course, by reading through the verse. I've done a little bit of study already. But let's read through the verse again, help me remember, and to get you acquainted with the entire passage. Today I'm reading for the ESV, John 3:22 through 2:36, which is the end of the chapter, by the way. After this, Jesus and his disciples went into went into the Judean countryside, and he remained there with them and was baptizing. John also was baptizing at Aenon near Salim, because the water was plentiful there, and the people were coming and being baptized. For John had not yet been put in prison. Now a discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing, and all are going to him. John answered, a person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I have said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who was the bride is the bridegroom. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease. He who comes from above is above all. He who is of the earth belongs to the earth and speaks in an earthly way. He who comes from heaven is above all. He bears witness to what he has seen and heard, yet no one receives his testimony. Whoever receives his testimony sets his seal to this, that God is true. For he whom God has sent utters the words of God, for he gives the Spirit without measure. The Father loves the Son, and has given all things into his hand. Whoever believes in the Son has eternal life. Whoever does not obey the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God remains on him. And again, that is John 3:22 through 36. It's a very interesting passage here. It's a lot of different verses that can add necessary context. As I mentioned before, the first thing I like to do is take a look at the cross references. So as for this first verse, actually before we do that, let's take a look at this first verse. This first verse here, this first couple of verses, provide a lot of provide a lot of context for the rest of this passage. So first we see after this, so referring to the previous events, which is Jesus meeting with Nicodemus and giving his grand speech. That is John 3:16 and the rest of chapter 3 to Nicodemus. Then it says his disciples went into the Judean countryside. So we get, okay, first we have time here, so we know that this was after the events above. And we know Jesus and his disciples went to a location. So they went to the Judean countryside. And he remained there with them and was baptizing. Now something to note here, this of course is prior research. When it means what he remained there with them and was baptizing, it probably wasn't Jesus himself doing the baptizing, as we learn from, So we learn from this other verse later in chapter 4. It says, now when Jesus learned the Pharisees... Hold on. There we go. Sorry. Chapter 4, verse 2. It says, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples. So in the later chapter, it is further explained that Jesus himself does not baptize, but only his disciples. That's just kind of an interesting fact here. But it also does kind of show you something interesting. John and Jesus, how they're a little bit different. John would actually baptize people. Jesus would not baptize people with water. Not the same way that John did. He let his disciples baptize with water. But now, what else would he baptize with? Well, that might be discussion for another time. But keep that in mind. So let's go take a look at my outline. So we know here that Jesus' disciples baptized nearby. And let's getting ahead, but let's think about that location. So after Jesus' meeting with Nicodemus. There we go. After Jesus' meeting with Nicodemus. So let's just take this. Let's copy verse 22. Copy. So after his meeting with Nicodemus, he left Jerusalem to go to the Judean, excuse my slow typing, countryside. There we go. This thing is important. It lays down the setting, the timing as well. And I think that's important to keep note of. So just looking at the face of this text, the information we can draw from it. We can learn more about this baptizing, of course, in some of these cross-references, like I mentioned. So later in verse 26, which we will examine. Of course, it's the description of one of the disciples of John coming to John and telling him about these disciples of Jesus baptizing. And I think this is important, and I think I already put this down. Yes, I did. John 4:1, it says, "Now when Jesus learned, the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John." And this is very important. And I think this is an important verse to look at, both before and after we read this passage, that right now, Jesus' ministry is growing. It adds a lot more meaning to this idea. Let's see, where is it? Which verse is it? Here we go, verse 30, where he says, "He must increase, but I must decrease." And as we learn from chapter 4, verse 1, this is happening, actively happening. Jesus' ministry is growing, while John's ministry is not just stagnating, but even to a point starting to reduce, like many of Jesus' early disciples. Something, again, we studied, my Bible study group, we studied a while back, some of his disciples like Nathaniel and I believe John were from the ranks of John the Baptist's disciples. So not just is John the Baptist's ministry beginning to kind of stagnate as Jesus becomes the big figure at this time, taking over his message in a way of redemption and repentance. But now we have this reduction where people are beginning to even break off from John the Baptist. And something interesting, as we see at the beginning of this kind of these collection of verses that kind of introduce the passage, is this is the final end. This is before the end, the true end of John the Baptist's ministry, which of course is him being put in prison and eventually beheaded. Now it's again another instance of showing us the order of things. It's showing that this is a time that John the Baptist and Jesus' ministry were overlapping. And you can even see, that's what it says right here in this outline note over here. And yeah, basically that the ministries of Jesus and John the Baptist overlapped and led to this kind of dispute. Well, we'll continue reading, but I'm curious if I wonder if there's any words exchanged. I don't believe there were any actual words exchanged, but it was definitely a point of concern among John's disciples. let me see. Now discussion arose between John's disciples and a Jew over purification. I'm curious about this. Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan. We'll have to take a look at this. I'm curious what the connection between this conversation in 25 and everything that follows. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's step back, take a look at these first few verses that add very necessary context. So we've already established after this. So after the events of the previous chapter. At some point, because in the previous chapter, let's check. It's good to double check. I believe this occurred in Jerusalem. Let's see. Okay. It appears that something like this happened at Jerusalem. That the Nicodemus thing happened at Jerusalem. And what I might do is I have a timeline. Let me see if I can find that. I think it's in here. Here's a Faith Life Study Bible timeline. I'm not seeing it, which is kind of unfortunate. I did have it as a part of my outline, and I took it out. I wasn't really using it for the purposes I thought I would. Let's see. Style of John. No. Fulfillment. Ooh, that sounds like a very interesting table. See how easy it is for me to get distracted while studying. Altogether, from what I've gathered, again, we have up here, it mentions that now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, so he was in Jerusalem. It would make sense that Nicodemus would be from Jerusalem. Being, a powerful member. So, I don't even know why I'm bothering to dispute this, but I think it is important to take a look and figure out where does this all come from, not just from a commentary or anything, to figure out for ourselves where is this happening, when is it happening. Of course, though, there's just some context that's hard to determine just from the verse, so that's why commentaries often use historical context and other context to help you establish things like order and timeline. So let's go back to our verse again. So it's Jerusalem. So now he's moved from Jerusalem to the Judean countryside. So he's moving out of the city. He's moving into the countryside. It's interesting. So let's take a look here. Judean territory. This is a very fascinating little note here in this study Bible over here. It says Jesus' ministry begins in Galilee in the Synoptic Gospels. So this is an example, is Matthew. And, this is important. This is very important. So let's take a look at this Matthew passage. It says, now, when he heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew into Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea, territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. So I think something interesting note here is we know that this takes place after the events of the passage we're studying, because it says when he heard that John had been arrested. And if we go back, here we go. Wait, no, hold on. That's not the passage. Let's go back and go to this. See, for John had not been put in prison. So this is kind of almost like proto-launch of his ministry, and it's not in Galilee like noted here. This is right now in Judea. So this is a point where his ministry is kind of beginning to grow in the Judean area, even though his ministry begins in Galilee in the Synoptic Gospels. That's because this period of ministry, as it says here, is activity in Judea prior to that described in the Synoptic Gospels. It's like one thing to note, so you know what? I think this is going to be an important thing to add to our outline. So let's see. Let's go to the outline. So let's see this right here. Let me figure out how to organize this. So let's see. Jesus is growing his ministry. Was growing his ministry. Let's see how I can best put this. So his ministry is growing, yet it doesn't truly begin. So let's see. Let's take a look at this. So he calls his first disciples, ministers to great crowds. This is almost a prologue, in a way, to his ministry. This time in Judea. So in the Synoptic Gospels, so let's see what this commentary says. This statement both anchors the beginning of Jesus' ministry in historical time and demonstrates the connection between John and Jesus. John's ministry was decreasing, but Jesus was increasing. So you say this time, when John was arrested, heralded the true launch date of Jesus' ministry, earthly ministry. So I think that's I think that's a fair way to put it. So let's add an extra note here. I'm trying to think of the best way to communicate this thought. And this is, I know semantics in the end, but I like to speak with the most clarity and write my outlines the most clarity possible. So let's see. His ministry after the arrest of John Baptist in the synoptic? I think I spelled that right. His ministry truly began after the arrest of John the Baptist in the Synoptic Gospels. So now let's see. We can say This is almost a prologue to his ministry. Or, this the beta run. I don't know. That's probably not the best way to put it. But this is. I think this is interesting, though, that Jesus' ministry started out kind of just smaller things, baptizing, teaching. And for example, let's see, right here, goes from this beginning of his ministry after the arrest of John to him ministering to great crowds. It's literally the headline put here. That now he goes throughout Galilee teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming his gospel, which is highlighted a little bit right here. Being fishers of men. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So his ministry is growing. Whoa, what's that? No, my font should not look that way. That's weird. What? Okay, hold up. I'm just going to create another node. Attach these to this cooler node. Oh, I'm just going to go on and call it a proto-ministry. No, not a photo ministry. That makes no sense. Even though those are a thing. It's a proto ministry. Oh, great. Not Romans. I just think I spelled that right. Spelling is not my strong suit. Start as proto ministry in Judea. As we see here, it truly began after John died. Well, let's see. Add that for further context, just saying, withdrew into Galilee, and then he began to preach. Those are important things to note. Okay, now let's go back here. Let's take a look. So right now, let's go back to our main passage. Let's not lose sight of the main goal. So again, let's summarize. We learned after Nicodemus, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside. So they're going out from Jerusalem into the countryside of Judea. Now let's take a look at this next part. And he remained there with them and was baptizing. We kind of already talked about this, and actually I'm going to reorder this a little bit. Well, actually, no, I'm going to keep that there. Something interesting here. So I'm actually going to take a look at my commentary before we move on to the next verse. I'm curious to see what some of the takes here are. So let's see. The land, the rural parts of the province. Let's see. Jesus left Judea altogether, returned to Galilee. Oh, that's interesting. So it's recorded even in John. He left Judea and departed again for Galilee. So I'm curious. Let's scroll a little further. this is something I think we might want to do. Let's quickly just do a bit of a character study summary of John real quick. Let's see how many times he appears in John. But first, let me just make a quick note. That he, of course, does. Oops, hold up. There we go. That he does leave even here. He was going to depart. Even though, actually, I might enter that at another time. I have a feeling that's just not going to be relevant at the moment. I think I made my point on that thought. So let's move forward. Hold up, let me reposition my mic. There we go. Here we go. So let's go back to our top of our passage. After this, Jesus and his disciples went to the Judean countryside. We already went through all that. We talked about how they were baptizing. Which, I think that's succinct enough note there. Now let's move on to what it says about John. So first, I want to take a look about this John person. Let's see this. Let's copy. Let's see. Actually, I might just be able to do it from here. No. Okay, I'm going to just have to do this. Come on. There we go. Let's copy that. Let's put it in the fact book. John the Baptist. Here we go. You know what? For this one, I might just have to scale that down a tiny bit. There we go. Son of Zechariah. Well, we should know that. He is the centerpiece of the Christmas story in Luke. Let's see what the dictionary has to say about him. Let me just take a look. Family tree of John the Baptist. Family tree. John the Baptist began ministry. What's this? Is this what I'm looking for? This might be. No, this is not what I'm looking for at all. Alright, let me just go back to the dictionaries. John the Baptist. So now I'm actually just go slide this over a little more now and get rid of that. So I'm not gonna read all this because I think it's a rather lengthy section here. Introduction, earliest written accounts of John the Baptist embedded within the larger narrative of the four Gospels. That's interesting. I didn't know he was revered by so many denominations and religions. That is curious. I never knew that. He's also the patron saint of many places around the world. Claimed to descend from the original movement. Well, they didn't listen to him. He must decrease so that Jesus must increase. Okay, so let's see. We have 4 Gospels and Acts. Oh, and even Josephus. So Baptist or baptizer was the surname given to John in reference to his activity. There were 4 primary uses of this root in Greek Testament. Let's see. Baptisma, just like what it says right there. Baptisma, baptism. What do I practice to renew or establish a relationship with God? Baptismos. Washing. Baptism also refers to the general act of immersing or dipping an object in the process of ritual purification. Just reading this. What was the one with the E with the thing over it means? Baptiste, I think. Wait, Baptiste is the Baptist or baptizer, the surname given to John. So that's interesting. So this is the word that comes after John's name. Pretty much every time we see him. And then bapto, yeah, yes, omega. So bapto, to dip something in a liquid water. Oh wait, hold on. So this is Baptiste, Baptistes, maybe. I didn't exactly learn all about the different hash marks and stuff. I know sometimes it means something, sometimes it doesn't. To dip something in water or liquid. In the Gospels, we are given different names for John. That's interesting. Okay, so Mark 1:4, we have Ioannis, Ho, Baptizon. John the Baptizer, the participle form of bapto. Matthew 3:1, we have John the Baptist. So John the Baptizer, John the Baptist, John the son of Zechariah. I would assume, yeah, that it was in relation to his birth story, which would make sense since his father was mentioned in that passage already. And then, simply refers to the testimony of John. While there is a historic debate in the church over the type of washing baptism describes, we're not even gonna go there. Well, let's see. Describes the meaning of baptism, clearly points to association between the use of water as a type of symbolic transformation or transition. I think this is incredibly important to acknowledge, that it definitely has a lot of value as purification symbol. Even in those days, especially among the Jewish religion, but I would say it's possible even among others that water was held in high regard among many cultures at the time, but especially among the Jews. As one passage we studied, and I think it was brought up by one of the other, let's see, where is it? One of the other, I'm just going to go back to it. The story of the wedding at Cana, where we learn about these jars for purification. So I'm not sure if I'll keep this, but I think I will note. So let's go back to the copy. Go back to my notes. The idea that water purification and transformation. Especially since this is a prior passage we've studied, I think it's worth highlighting. Okay, now let's get back to the dictionary and our previous reference. Here we go. Semantic terms used in the New Testament push the semantic boundaries of mere immersion or dipping. Each context clearly colors the term with various shades. Baptism can refer to the Exodus experience as of Israel from Egypt, and is also appears as a symbol for crucifixion. We are all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great my distress until it is accomplished. That is rather interesting. The word usually relates either to John's baptism, the early practice of Christ followers, or the metaphoric uses mentioned above. Baptize. Let's see. Dip refers. The verb occurs 4 times. More nuance. Actually, I'm really glad I found this article. It's giving me a lot of perspective on just baptism as a whole that I did not have. So let's take a look. A deeper look. So it's used to metaphorically illustrate destruction. Let's take a look at this verse. My heart staggers, horror has appalled me. The twilight I longed for has been turned for me into trembling. I'm curious where baptism. I wonder where baptism is placed in this verse. Well, let's investigate, but let's not get sidetracked though. So let's see, what did it say here? The Septuagint, Hebrew. I don't exactly read Hebrew quite yet. Well, let's see if it's this word maybe. Whoa. Okay, wait, hold on. Okay. Nope, that's not it. My heart staggers, been turned into trembling. My heart staggers. Let's see. It's not this one, is it? No. Horror has appalled me. Kind of interested in this because I honestly don't see the connection. Ultimately, the verb occurs 4 times with somewhat more nuance. In Isaiah 21:4, it is used metaphorically for destruction. Horror terrifies me. Turned. Ah. Let's see, is this it? Nope. Last glimmer of hope into sheer terror. There's nothing that the translator says translated to anything like baptism. Unless I'm missing it. See, dipped. Appalled me. Okay, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole anymore, but I was curious. See, in 2 Kings, it uses a middle voice. And dipped himself. Background, intertextuality. Gospel writers frame their narratives around John the Baptist with creative typological use of scripture. The following will briefly be discussed
as they help you. Whoa, what? Okay, how do you... Let's see, elucidate. See, if I just try, I know what elucidate means. That word just scared me for a second. Yeah, sorry. Elucidate the identity and function of John. The typological use of the prophetic scriptural text, including the Elijah narrative of 1 Kings 17. So let's see. Supposed relation with the Quran community, believed by some to be affiliated with the Essenes. Huh. Alright, so let's see. A lot of references here. Let's just read on. We'll get back to that. As evinced by the Gospels. I would think that means shown. Sometimes I wonder. By the Gospels, the identity of John was perplexing and often enmeshed with Jesus or Elijah. Compare Luke 9:7-9, Matthew 11:1-19. Let's see. So Luke. Some said that John had been raised by the dead, or raised from the dead. Sorry. There's some that Elijah had appeared. So this comparison to Jesus or Elijah is common. The accounts themselves are often in tension with each other. Jesus refers to John the Baptist as Elijah in the Gospel of Matthew, but in John's Gospel, John the Baptist denies that he is the prophet. While John denies that he is corporeally the prophet Elijah, it is undeniable that the four Gospel narratives associate them with each other. With New Testament writers sometimes reused foundational figures from Old Testament traditions, particularly those whose death were shrouded in mystery. The burial of Moses is unknown to this day, and Elijah was taken up in the whirlwind. These are the two figures who appear with Jesus at his transfiguration. Descriptions of John the Baptist clearly set him in the tradition of Elijah. John appeared as an ascetic. I'm probably saying that wrong. Ascetic. Yeah. Voluntary abstention from satisfaction of bodily and social needs, including food, drink, activity, and sleep, clothes, wealth, and social interaction. Oh, that's interesting. So something that Elijah followed. In the Judean wilderness near the Jordan River, wearing camel hair clothing and a leather belt, he ate wild locusts and honey. See, they answered he wore a garment of hair with a belt of leather around his waist. It is Elijah the Tishbite, so this is something they have in common. Similar to both John and Jesus, Elijah also had a disciple calling. Before Elijah ascended to heaven, in response to Elisha's plea to remain with him, he read, Then Elijah said to him, Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan. Stay here, the Lord has sent me to the Jordan. John the Baptizer on the east side of Jordan. Wait, stay here, for the Lord has sent me. This is curious. Please stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan. As the Lord lives, I will not leave you. John baptized on the east side of the Jordan, opposite Jerusalem. Much of Elijah's prophetic activity occurred on the east side of Jordan, and he ascended to heaven from there as well. That is interesting. I had no clue the connection between Elijah and John the Baptist were it was a more physical connection. I thought it was more just a spiritual thing. I didn't know that just the tradition, actions, and even location were related to each other. That is interesting. Curious to what degree I should bring this up in my study. I'm just finding this general knowledge very interesting about John and his character. Babylonian exile may have come from the eastern shores of Jordan. Upon their return to Jerusalem, John the Baptist also could symbolically represent a return from exile and a new exodus, as entering the water symbolized through baptism, and consequently the land was sent within the paradigmatic theme of Israel's prior water crossing. That is... It's the water crossing the Red Sea. It's beginning of a new journey for the Israelites. So, being baptized, in a way, is the beginning of a new journey as a Christian. Or in this case for John, as a Jew. Turning away, repenting, and pledging themselves to the Lord. So let's see. So honestly, I just came to take a look. Both claim to prepare the way for God. So actually, I'm going to get back to the goal. I'm just trying to figure out where he is mentioned, even though I probably should have just done a search anyway. Context for gospel accounts. Wow. Matthew, Luke. Okay, here we go. So let's go to John. Oops. Oh, here we go. John the Baptist is referred to immediately at the beginning of John's gospel in a highly symbolic language. So let's take a quick look. Bear witness to the light. Yeah, I remember studying all this. That all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to bear witness about the light. Jesus and John's ministries are shown as running in the same area for John's imprisonment, and he and Jesus baptized their followers in the same place. And of course, that's what we're studying right now. The details of John's arrest and execution may have been intentionally omitted, as priority was given to the theological meaning of John's baptism in relation to Jesus' ministry. Political dimension. It's all incredibly interesting. But again, need to remain focused and looking at our passage, but I believe that any context that's at least known by the teacher can really help, giving greater perspective and clarity on what you're saying. Even if it's not directly related. So now, let's get back on track. Let's go back to our main passage and to our main commentary. Oh, yeah, let's go all the way back to up here. John was also baptizing. So, first, let me just take a look at my outline, review what I've got here. Not a ton, because again, this first verse mostly sets up a lot of context. But I think it's important to touch on some of these. So let's see what we have. After Jesus' meeting with Nicodemus, he left Jerusalem to go to the Judean countryside. After this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside. So I have this verse to support this. And he remained there baptizing with them and was baptizing. So Jesus was there and the disciples were baptizing. And that's another thing. The Jesus' disciples baptized nearby. Of course, here I want to highlight the fact that it was the disciples. Jesus himself did not baptize. An interesting thing to remember here, in contrast to John. And then just quickly touch on the idea that what is baptism all about? Again, symbolizes purification, transformation. We see that from over there. This is something I might want to expound upon as I go through this verse and go through this passage and see how much emphasis is put on the baptizing, which I think there will be. So we may revisit that topic either later, or I may come back and fill that out more so we can talk about baptism as a whole. So I just want this to be here to provide a reason for why everyone is eager to baptize. It ultimately symbolizes purification, transformation, and that's what they're doing. They're purifying and transforming, a symbolic purifying and transformation of the people of Israel, preparing them for the message that would come in Jesus' primary ministry, in his main ministry, where he would declare, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." And of course, later he would even talk about being the way, the truth, and the life, which that is next chapter. Well, not per se. I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'm getting unfocused. Let's focus again. So then, of course, I wanted to highlight the idea that Jesus' ministry was growing here in this chapter. So we see he started his, what I like to call his proto-ministry in Judea. And people were still taking notice of this proto-ministry before his primary ministry out of Galilee. Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, so he was definitely growing. While John himself was beginning to stagnate, his ministry was beginning to end. I just realized one thing I left out. No, I didn't leave it out. Hold on. Okay, and then they came to John. Again, we're seeing this idea that, and we'll see in the next couple of verses, we'll see this kind of clash, because the disciples of John are seeing they're on a bit of a sinking boat. So they come to John. And then, let's see, his ministry truly began after the arrest of John the Baptist in the Synoptic Gospels. And that, again, is supported by these two verses. We have, now when he heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew into Galilee, and then he began the time. From that time, Jesus began to preach, saying, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." So that's when he really begins to preach and go out to all the synagogues and give all these sermons, and that's when his ministry truly begins. And of course, that's when it eventually leads to the cross. Excuse me. So now, let's take a look at verse 23. Real quick, and then I think I'm going to call it a night. It's almost been an hour on stream. And, Lord willing, I'll be back tomorrow. So let's see, now we go down to verse 23. John was also baptizing at Aenon, near Salem, because the water was plentiful there and the people were coming and being baptized. So this is interesting. First, we have John enters the picture here. He's also baptizing in a similar fashion as Jesus and his disciples. He's baptizing in Aenon. Now, I'm curious about this. What are we dealing with here? What's this Aenon? What are these places? So let's take a look. So it says here in this commentary, John was also baptized near Aenon and Salim. Aenon is a name based on the Aramaic word for spring. The exact location is uncertain, but tradition suggests the site is about 6 miles south of Beth Shan and, oh boy, Scythopolis. Scythopolis. There we go. Just west. So let's see, west of the Jordan. Okay, I can see that. Jordan River, and the precise location of Salem is unknown. So let's see what this does. Okay, I do not have those resources, unfortunately. I might need to goes up. Actually, let me see if I can get a map resource here. I think I might have a map that has some of this. Ooh, actually, I'm going to just put this in my fact book. No, wrong thing. Fact book. No, oops. Wait, what happened to it? I got rid of the fact book, didn't I? No? Yes, I did. Social, oh boy. Just gonna have to take a look at it over here. Passage, illustration, media. Here we go, fact book. Anon. Okay, I think that might be the wrong Anon. Oh, a village. John the Baptist conducted his ministry. Okay, let's see, media. Okay, this is actually on my other screen. Drag this over here. Hopefully this works. Oh boy. I was trying to supersize the UI so you guys can see better. I don't think it's well for this map here. Let me see what I can do. Can I get rid of this maybe? Okay. So this is Anon. Couldn't connect to the internet. Hold on. Let me check my internet. Okay, no, we're good. We're good. Retry. There we go. What? Let's see. Stream's still going, so I don't know what it's saying. Fit. Maybe this will work. Full screen. Okay. It's a little bit better. Here we go. I'll just ignore. Let's see. Retry. Updating maps. Okay, I'm just ignore that. Good. Go away. Go away. There we go. So we have Anon here. Let's zoom out a bit. So that's interesting. So this is this Anon. He conducted his ministry. Life of Jesus. You see John the Baptist starts his ministry. Jordan, Jerusalem. The world life of Jesus. Whoa. Here we go. His Judean ministry. Okay. Not too far off. So Jerusalem. Capernaum. Okay. So this again is his kind of first period, his proto-ministry as I like to call it. Starts at Jerusalem. After talking to Nicodemus, he heads out into the countryside, somewhere over here, someplace. Since the Jordan's over here and Anon's up there, probably someplace around here. It's never really specified. Let me see. Whoops, wrong thing. Oh, there's no way I can exit full screen for a second. That did not help at all. Yes, it did. It actually did. So it doesn't really mention a specific location, but it's near this Anon and Slim. So let's check this. Let's see if Slim's in the fact book. A village. So let me see. So yeah, it's somewhere over here. So my guess is, and this is a very, I don't know, I'm just saying, as a casual observer of what I've studied so far, I would guess it'd be somewhere along the Jordan, maybe nearby this Anon and Slim, or someplace nearby. But I think it's interesting to have this here. But I think this is even more interesting, the idea that, so he starts in Jerusalem, which I don't know why that's not highlighted right now, but he starts in Jerusalem, moves through this area, eventually he's going to end up in Samaria, and that's the woman at the well, which is going to be next month's study. Then of course he ends up to Capernaum, then he returns to the Galilean area, and that's when he begins his second period, his main ministry. So I think that was an interesting little tangent to get off on. That's the problem with these kind of starting points that have a lot of fact and a lot of context here. It's really easy to get bogged down in looking at maps and historical context, details, and records, when really we are here to study. But it's fun to cover, so I'm just going to go with it for now. And we might have to study the message more later. So let's just see if we can just conquer this little section here. So he's baptizing, was also baptizing, and his water's plentiful. Now I think it was interesting that it said Anon. Actually, let's see. Salim. These things actually, according to this, let's see, where is it? Here we go. Means spring. So it's definitely water there. So I think it's important. So let's see. John and his disciples baptized nearby. Now this is again, since we don't know the exact location of either John the Baptist or Jesus in this passage, when I mean nearby, that means that they were in the general Judean area. In the countryside someplace. Obviously in a way that they could both hear about each other. But even then, I may just leave nearby out. But basically, actively baptized. I think it's something worth noting that his ministry was definitely still active, because it says here, let's see, and people were coming and being baptized. Excuse me. John and his disciples actively baptized. You know what? Actively baptized. And let's just note here, I might just copy this as an excerpt here. Let's see, where is it? Let's see, 9. Place with, well, water. So Anon means spring. Aramaic word. I might just take this whole excerpt here. So I'm just going to take this as an excerpt. It cites it already anyway. So I'm just going to do that. I'm actually going to put the citation in the notes just to make this look a little cleaner. See, note. Where are the notes? Just forget how to note. See, file, note. Here we go. Edit note. There we go. Just so I have that if I need to publish it or something. Just have that information there. So, it's a place with plentiful water. The exact location unknown. place with, well, water. I should might as well say plentiful water. Why not? Plentiful water. Exact location is unknown. So this is important. So we know the location of John the Baptist. Give us a little bit of that extra context yet again. So now, let's take a look at this. And we've already pretty much talked about this and the importance of this verse here, but let's just quickly review. For John the Baptist had not yet been put in prison. Very important. Very important. Wait, hold on. So let's see, V24. Well, let's see. John the Baptist hadn't been put in prison yet. But I think it's important to say, but his ministry was waning, which again is essentially the whole point of this passage, is to show us that John the Baptist was beginning, his ministry was beginning at twilight as Jesus begins to rise. So I think it's important to point that out. So yeah, that's in verse 24 here. And again, he had not been yet thrown in prison. Let's see, John had been arrested. So let's see, did we talk about this? Yeah, we did up there, but it's a pivot point for the gospel story. So let's add a couple of these. Let's see, Matthew. I think we put that one up here, didn't we? Yeah, we did. No, let's just add this account. For it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. So I think it's important that his arrest is a pivot point, and we can look back here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do something I rarely do using my note. I'm going to use a connector. Here we go. So let's see. I don't want that blocking the other ones. I rarely use these little connector things, honestly. Actually, no, I'm going to move that over there. There we go. That's much better. Because, well, why was it a pivot point? I'm going to do that in reverse. It's a pivot point because that was the beginning of Jesus' ministry. Let's go back. Let's yet again review. Let me take a look at this commentary real quick. So we've taken a look at these first few verses that again set up a lot of context before the main story. We've discussed the locations, we've discussed the order of events. We especially highlighted the idea that, again, this is the message of the entire passage. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but let's summarize that this passage, this part of the passage, sets up the idea that Jesus' ministry begins to grow, begins to flourish as John's ministry at this time is still active, and he's still bringing in people to baptize, but it begins to wane. Because, as we see in 24, eventually, John will be put in prison, and his ministry will essentially end. And then Jesus' ministry will truly begin. I'm Chase Carrington. Thank you so much for watching and tuning in. If you want to check out my last hands-on Bible study video, go on ahead. I honestly don't have a set schedule for this. Ideally, I was trying to do it weekly, but I actually need to study this entire passage by the end of the week. So I might, Lord willing, do a video every day while I go through this entire passage. We've done 3 verses here. We still have a ways to go. You can see I've even highlighted some incredibly interesting passages. So I can't wait to get through them with you. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you like this video. Also, if you want to try something other than a very loose, casual live video, take a look at some of my more precisely produced videos on my channel. One that I think you may want to take a look at if you haven't already is my video on the different types of Greek love in the Bible. That one's very interesting and relevant for the upcoming date, which is going to be Valentine's Day coming soon. And there's a couple other videos that are very, very interesting. I'm working on a video right now to come out, Lord willing, sometime later this week, Friday or Saturday, about making one of these Bible study outlines. As you see I have here, I use an app called MindNode, but in my video I'm going to go into not just the making of an outline like this, but even how I study and kind of my process a little bit, and hopefully it'll help you be a better Bible study teacher, or even just for personal use, help you to understand and record your different thoughts on different Bible passages. Yet again, I'm Chase Carrington. Thank you for watching, and subscribe and chase the sun with me. God bless and good night.